Good evening. Hope everybody's having a nice Sunday afternoon. Tonight I thought we'd talk about everybody's favorite subject, and that's money. You know, when it comes to the Lord's church, there's two types of money. There's mine, and then there's the Lord's, or there's yours and the Lord's. I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise. The first scandal in the church involved the use of money. And we read about that over in Acts chapter 5, beginning there in verse 1. We see, but a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira his wife sold a possession, and he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the piece of your land for yourself? Part of the price of the land for yourself. While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God. Then Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. So great fear came upon all those who heard these things. And the young men arose and wrapped him up, carried him out, and buried him. Now it was about 3 hours later when his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter answered her, Tell me whether you sold the land for so much. She said, Yes, for so much. Then Peter said to her, How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Then immediately she fell down at her feet and breathed her last. And the young men came in and found her dead, carried her out, buried her by her husband. So great fear came upon the church, upon all who had heard these things. Like I say, the first conspiracy that befell the church was due over money. In verses 1 and 2, we find that it was a conspiracy to lie to the Holy Spirit. The result of that conspiracy in verses 5 through 10, we find that it was death, that they were made an example of, that they breathed their last breath of life. And the objects of the lessons is obviously for others, in such that a great fear came over the multitude, obviously, that they would not lie. Christians need to be careful in today's world, too, with the two kinds of money mentioned in the text. The money that was their own, and then the money that was laid at the apostles' feet. The great lie that came over is that they acted or stated that they gave all the proceeds unto the church when they did not. And so we're going to look at this in the two parts, the individual's money and then the Lord's money. And we'll see that there's certain things that we can do with each pot of money. And that shouldn't be foreign. We see that, especially anybody who lives within the government, probably in large corporations, comptrollers or lawmakers hedge off, or they say certain funds are for certain projects or for certain expenses that are incurred, like Social Security. Certain portion of taxes are collected and are given out to the Social Security Administration to pay that out to people. There are money set aside for the Department of Defense so that the country can build their weapons of war and pay for the troops and etc. You don't hear of the Department of Defense borrowing from the Social Security Administration or the Social Security Administration receiving money from the Department of Defense to pay for those things. In the government, we call that Now it just left me. Misappropriation of funds. Congress appropriates funds for certain functions, and you cannot cross those functions with those funds. And if you will, that's kind of what we find within the church, or that's what I read within the Bible. There are the funds, if you will. If you will, there's two appropriations. There's your funds, and then there's the church's funds. The church gets its funds from you, but once you, as it was stated, when the saints laid it at the apostles' feet, in other words, they gave up the authority of that money and gave the authority over to the saints, which or not the saints, but the apostles, and how it would be executed. Then we see there's a pattern, again, looking to the patternism. We see that there were certain things that the apostles spent that money for, and we see also that carried on throughout the New Testament. And so that's what we're going to look at here tonight, how the individual's money was used to execute, or what it was used to execute for, and then what the church's funds were used to execute for. So looking at the individual's money, if you will, and I guess to finish up that thought, we don't want to misappropriate funds, just as it's against the law to misappropriate funds in our land. It's also against the law of the Lord to misappropriate funds when it comes to executing His will. So let's begin by looking at an individual's money. Where it comes from various, and again, it should be honorable means. To gain it by dishonorable means would be to gain it by sinful means. In other words, we don't go out and steal, we don't go out and swindle, those type of things. But even back in the day of the New Testament, people earned wages. They got paid for their trade, their skills, may have invested into other people, other enterprises, gifts, things were handed down, things were given, and etc. Many ways that one can earn money through honorable means. Just looking at a couple of these versions, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28 says, "Let him who steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working his hands, that it be good, that he may have something to give him who has need." So again, that idea of honorable means, not by dishonorable means. James chapter 4, verses 13 through 15 says, "Come now, who say, today or tomorrow you will go to such and such a city and spend a year there, buy and sell and make profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life but even a vapor that appears for a time and then vanishes away. Instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and go and do this or do that." Now the point of this is not to foot stomp being presumptuous, but here we have a different means. Here they were going to go trade, buy, and sell. Entrepreneurs, if you will. Men in business for themselves. But they were to do that honorably. Even going back to the law of Moses, they were told that they would not to put their thumbs on the scales, if you will, or to be honorable amongst their fellow citizens or whatnot. So again, funds are gained through honorable means, however that might be. In our world today, we, again, through wages, through a given trade, through commerce, through investment. There's nothing. Some people say, well, you're gambling when you invest in the market. No, that's not true. You're not gambling. Gambling is no. How do I want to say that? Gambling is not a honorable means, is because I'm losing my thought. Didn't mean to really bring up gambling. But nonetheless, gambling is not really considered because it's through chance. It's not through an honorable means. An investment is not necessarily a chance. There's no guarantee that that investment will pay out. But you're investing into a company, into a market, in hopes that it will bring profit and that you will gain share. There's nothing wrong with that. That's totally different from putting money on number two and spinning the wheel and hoping that the marble lands on the right color or on the right number. That's two totally different ways of earning money. Our next point is that this type of money is under the control of the individual in harmony with God's will. Going back to verse 4 of our reading, and there in Acts, Peter says, was it not under your control when it was yours? So it is under this type of money, your money, it's under what you spend it on. It's totally entirely up to you. That's your decision to do. But it should be, we do that in harmony with the will of God. In other words, we don't buy illicit things. We don't buy things, we don't buy wine to become drunkards. We don't buy illegal drugs. We don't go against the law of the land. Those type of things. As long as it's, legal, either in the eyes of the land or legal in the eyes of the Lord, then we can use that money to buy that, to buy those things, if you will. Now, we're not going to drill down an exhaustive list, but if it doesn't conflict with God's will, then it should. For the most part, I can't think of how it would violate God's will that we would use your money. So the use to fulfill the individual's, it's used to fulfill the individual's function here on earth. Domestic responsibilities, whether it be food, raiment, and clothing. We see that echoed there a couple times in the scriptures. Shelter, that's the raiment, if you will, to buy a house. Those are all good needs. Education, it can be used for those type of things, as well as recreation. Even back in that time, that they entertained themselves, but it should be things that wholesome entertainment, if you will. There's nothing wrong with spending your money on those things. That's what God would expect you to spend that money on. Today's world, we buy cars, automobiles to get us back to traverse. That would be no different than buying a donkey or an animal back in the time of the Lord. And we could talk for hours on the type of things that you can use that money for. It also is used to civil responsibilities, render unto Caesar taxes, taxes. Render under Caesar's what are Caesar's? That type of thing. We in this world, we pay taxes into all kinds of things. We pay into a central treasury, and then from there it's given out. Are we responsible? Are we responsible for every dollar that the government spends? No, we're not held accountable. If a lawmaker makes a bad decision on what to use that money for, am I held accountable in God's eyes? No. Just as back in the many Caesars were horrible people in the eyes of the Lord, but yet Christ said, "Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's," when it came to paying taxes. Charitable, humanitarian responsibilities. We see this pattern also, that work to give unto to one another. When you see a brother who's in destitute, come to his aid. We'll probably talk about this a little bit more. We're getting away from this in today's in today's world, if you ask me, the government has kind of stepped in and facilitated a lot of those charitable needs through Social Security, um, welfare, and those type programs, and those are good, and that's good. I mean, in the United States, we live in a great country, and there's really no reason, for the most part, other than, in my opinion, bad decision making for anybody to go without food and shelter. There's plenty of means available through our government to facilitate those things. Now that doesn't mean that emergency situations don't arise and the government can't react in time to facilitate those needs, such as a hurricane, tornado, or whatnot. So if your neighbor's house gets blown over, should you extend hospitality and take them? Absolutely, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? If a fellow member in the church falls on hard times, should you not extend, some type of monetary or some other type of aid to help them until they can get, further aid from the government or whatnot? Absolutely. Why would we not? And then we also see that they had hospitable responsibilities back at that time to render hospitality to one another. Now, granted, back then they didn't have Motel 6 and Red Roof Inn and Holidays Inn, so when they traversed, there was inns, if you will, but I'm sure that it wasn't like in today's world, and so often I'm sure that they would come in and they needed to put up for the night, and that's what that's what they would extend hospitality to one another. And then there was also spiritual responsibilities. We almost cite 1 Corinthians 16 verse 2 every Sunday when we do the collection of the Lord's, the Lord, the basket, if you will. That's so the church may collect funds and to execute its mission, spreading the gospel, providing relief to needy saints, and et cetera, and et cetera. Those things to fulfill that pattern there within the Scripture. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But again, these are just some of the things that one can do with their own money. And that's what's expected. That fits the pattern, and it doesn't go against the violation of any of God's laws. So basically, we can do whatever we want with our money as long as it doesn't violate God's laws, if you will. Now, let's talk about the Lord's money. This is another type of money, if you will, another pot of money. The Lord's money. The Lord's treasury is for special purposes. Has always existed among the people, going clear back to when the Israel was established, going clear back to Numbers chapter 18. And we'll go ahead and read this, since this is we'll read this because we don't study the Old Testament that much, so we may be not completely familiar, but beginning there in Numbers 18, verse 25, it says, Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak thus to the Levites, and say to them, When you take from the children of Israel the tithes which I have given you from them as your inheritance, you shall offer up a heave offering of it to the Lord, a tenth of the tithe, and your heave offering shall be reckoned to you as though it were the grain of the threshing floor, and as the fullness of the winepress. Thus you shall also offer a heave offering to the Lord for all the tithes which you receive from the children of Israel, and you shall give the Lord's heave offering from it to Aaron the high priest. Of all your gifts you shall offer up every heave offering due to the Lord, and all the best of them, the consecrated part of them. Therefore you shall say to them, when you have lifted up the best of it, then the rest shall be accounted to the Levites as the produce of the threshing floor, and to the produce of the winepress. And you may eat it in any place, you and your household, for it is your reward for the work in the tabernacle of meeting. And you shall bear no sin because of it, when you have lifted up the best of it, but you shall not profane the holy gifts of the children of Israel, lest you die. So the priesthood was to be sustained off the tithes, off the offerings that the children of all the other tribes, the children of all the other tribes, gave unto the Levites. If you remember, the Levites didn't have a chunk of land that was set aside for them. They were put into the cities that they had taken over, and then this is how they were sustained. So it was like given unto the church today, if you would. And then they were off to offer up a tenth of the tithe that they had received unto the Lord. Then we see during the apostles we see an establishment of a treasury as well. Consider John chapter 12 verse 6. It says, "This he said, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box, and he used to take what was put into it." So they had a little money box that they carried with them for expenses, if you will. John 13:29 says, "For some, though, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus said to him, buy those things we need for the feast, or that we should give something to the poor." So even Christ, they had a money box to facilitate some of their basic needs, if you will. And here Christ is directing Judas to go and get the things that they would need for the feast, if you will. And then, of course, the early church, they established the treasury there under the direction of the apostles. Again, we see that echoed in 1 Corinthians 16:1 and 2. Gained by the giving of the Christians, where it says, "On the first day of the week, let each of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come." So that's, this is the scriptural authority, the pattern, if you will, for the church to have a treasury. And this is the means by which that treasury gains its funds. It's not from the government, it's not from Caesar, but it's from the individual Christians, or disciples, if you will, who attend that local church. So when that money was given over, we see that it was under apostolic authority. There in Acts chapter 4, verse 37, it says, "Having land, sold it, and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet." This is the actual establishment of the church. Before they would have probably had buildings and meeting places when they were meeting in the synagogues and stuff. They would go and sell their excess, and they would bring those funds, and they would lay it they would give it unto the apostles for it to be ministered out. In Acts chapter 5 verse 2, we see, "And he kept back part of the proceeds," this is from our reading, "he and his wife being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet." Again, it wasn't, the sin wasn't that they held back some of the money. The sin is that they lied about how much they had given. They said they gave all their proceeds unto the church. And that just wasn't true. So we see this idea of at the feet, which would be to be under the direction and or control of the apostles, if you will. The apostolic word still directs and controls the Lord's treasure, if you will. Again, the New Testament authority. When we read in the scriptures, we look for either an example, a pattern, or direct command in how to execute the Lord's funds. Just as when I was in the Air Force, and I wasn't the comptroller, but I was what they called a resource advisor. And we had there was an Air Force manual, if you will, an Air Force instruction. This thing was about yay thick. And whenever you fulfilled those duties, if you had a question for what money was used for, every account, if you will, there's an account listing that consisted of like 30 different characters or whatnot. But usually the first few of those said give a description of what that money was for. And so you could look up, like if the account started with 4,500, you would go to that manual, look up 4,500, and it would say that these funds are used for X, 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 and X. And so you could read what you could, and or sometimes there would be examples of what you could not use that money for. And so that's the same thing that we do here today. When it comes to questions about what the church can do with its money, we should be going to the scriptures and looking. Well, it may not list out different accounts and what you can use those for. We should be looking for patterns of how they utilized it and how they collected it, and then how the expenditure of it was executed for the authority for us to use. So it was used to fill the collective function of the church. That's the pattern that we mean. What do we mean by that? Things needed for worship and assembly. You know, a meeting place, the communion, the wine, the fruit of the vine, the bread, those type of things is what one of the things that the funds was used for. Things needed for the work of the church, whatever that might have been, whether it be and again, when I say whatever, it means not for everything, but for the things specified within the scripture. So one of the works of the church was for preaching. We see that Paul talked about receiving a wage from different churches. Now, Paul never received a wage from the church that he was at, so that people couldn't use that against him. But nonetheless, he did receive wages from other churches. Benevolence. We see over, I'm not reading all these. I'm giving you these scriptures. We could spend who knows how many more minutes here reading these things. But I think we're all familiar with the workings of what they were. But when it came to the benevolence of the saints, for the needy saints, like when a famine befell Jerusalem, Paul took up a collection and took a representative from those area churches with them to give the money to the elders at the churches of Jerusalem to relieve those saints. That was an act of benevolence. And then also edification, if you will, edification of the saints. Look there at Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 16. It says, from whom the whole body, joined together and knitted together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share, cause the growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. Through edification. So, I don't study material, that type of stuff. But this is what we see as far as the works of the church: preaching, benevolence, and edification. We don't see where they built schools in different foreign lands, or they went out and built homes with the Lord's treasury. Now, I'm not saying that there wasn't saints there that didn't do those things. I'm sure that there were craftsmen and tradesmen that's where they earned their wages, but that wasn't a work of the church any more than Ron's architectural business is his source of income, not a work of the church. And so this is what we see in how the church's money was used. And any other passage that you can dig up, or any other example that you can find within the scriptures as far as authorized uses of the treasury. So there's a big difference between my money and what it can be used for and how it's gained and how it's executed, and then that of what the church's money can be, or the Lord's money can be used for. Unfortunately, in the denominational world, those lines get blurred very, very much so. Even in some places that call themselves a Church of Christ, they blur those lines and use those funds, or the Lord's funds, much as their own. Whether to have a pantry to give food out to whoever comes knocking on the door, to building basketball courts, ball fields, whatever it might be, sources of entertainment. Again, we don't see a pattern where the church was in the entertainment business. We don't see where they were in the food pantry. Did they provide benevolence? Yes. They provided benevolence to the saints, just like, say, relief from the famine, but we don't hear them providing relief to the general populace. Are those good works? Absolutely. Never said it wasn't a good work, but it's not an authorized work. Is it an authorized work? Can Jim Love use his money to build a ball field and a basketball court and those things to facilitate that? Absolutely. Nothing against that whatsoever. Problem is, in the world today, we want to do what I call load shedding. We don't want that responsibility being put on me. Oh, I got this great idea, but I don't want the responsibility for carrying it out. Why don't we use the church's money to carry it out? And that's what happens. And unfortunately, that's not authorized. So in conclusion, we must clearly distinguish between our own and the Lord's money. We must be clear. Just as, consider Acts chapter 3 and verse 6. It says, "Then Peter said, 'Silver and gold I do not have, but what I do have I give to you. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk.'" We must, again, distinguish between what is ours and what is the Lord's. In raising the money, the church is not a bank. The church we're not a business. We don't sell things. Those type of things. Those would be illicit gains of money for the church. And also in using the money. There's very specific things that we can use it for, and there's a lot of things that we can't use it for. So we must remember that the money is a thing to be used. We don't just collect it and keep on it and hold on to it, and it's a thing to be used. And it can be used for anything right to be done by the right, and by right we mean in the sight of the Lord, whether it be the individual or the church. And anything that can be done, that money can be used for. And there is no such thing as a church able to do it, but not out of the church treasury, if you will. So that's the lesson. Sometimes, I'm not saying we have a problem here with thankfully this congregation doesn't have issues that I know of. But sometimes there's confusion, especially in the world, that comes up, and sometimes it's good to remind ourselves what we can and can't do. Because sometimes we see what the world's doing and we say, "Oh, why can't we do that?" And sometimes we need to remind ourselves why we can't do those things. So now we want to extend the invitation. The invitation